David, what is going on, my friend?
Larry, thanks for having me here today.
Oh, you bet, man. So this is going to be fun. I know it's going to be fun, but no such thing as work-life balance. Are you sure about that?
I'm very sure. It's not a popular opinion, but I really do think it's all about integration, right? I
Yeah.
think balance, we chase after this and we never find it. So we're always kind of thinking about like, how do I balance? How do I take time? Is it 40%, 20%? Like, what are the things? And we keep talking and thinking about this, and it eats up the actual time, right?
Yeah.
Rather than doing the activity of being with our family, our kids, our wives, or whatever, we think about this balance, and I think it destroys us. I think about integration, right? Like, how do I integrate my family, my kids into all the things that I'm doing?
I think that's a really powerful tool, not only for us as business owners and entrepreneurs, or even if you're a career dad. Even when I was doing the career thing, like I did the integration thing. I could be wrong. I heard this a long, long time ago. You might know the answer to this, but I heard that the actual term work-life balance was actually something that was created maybe in the 70s or the 80s. I can't remember. I'm going to butcher this, but I want to say it came when more women went into the workforce. So like we had a flood of women go into the workforce where it became more the norm that the man was no longer the sole provider, that women entered the workforce. So they created this term called work-life balance, where women could balance their workload as an employee somewhere, a business owner, or whatever, and then also trying to fulfill the mom role. But I could be wrong. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know the history, but I think it makes sense too. Like, if you think about what work was before,
Right.
it was all consuming, right?
Yeah.
Like, you worked for a company for a long period of time, usually with a pension, right? Like, it was all you did, right? And there's still cultures like Japan and others where that is the norm, right? And I think that shift over time took us away and said, there's more than just work. And dads and moms need to find, how do you do those things together? And I think we incorrectly use the word balance, because balance means like a scale, and we're taking a decision point of plus and minus, and we're going up and down. That's not really what we're doing, because we can actually have more time with that, right? When you think about integration, it's not a plus and a minus, like I have 1 hour less with my family and 1 hour work, more of work. It's really, how do I do both of them together and show the value of work to my kids and my family, which I think is more valuable than any piece of work that we do, right? Like, showing our kids what hard work means is a real struggle in today's society.
I agree with that 100%. What is it you see when it comes to just maybe youth and work ethic, and what are some things that you see?
So I think that there's obviously a culture of entitlement, right?
Yeah.
That's one side of it. I think the other side is instant gratification. If I look at my kids, like, I try to minimize screen time as much as possible, but it's not 100%. It never is. I don't think that's a realistic goal. And it's all for them about instant gratification. So showing them that valuable things take not just hard work, but take time, I think is one of the most important things we have to do as parents today. Is good things, great things take time. And it's hard to tell someone that without showing them.
I agree. I totally agree. Do you think also the number of people working remotely, where they necessarily now they really kind of can't separate the family aspect or the home aspect from work, which I know has created all kinds of different challenges as well. But what do you think that's created? I would say from both a pro perspective and a con perspective.
So look, I've worked remotely for 15 plus years and run remote companies for a long time before it was cool to do. I remember before Zoom, we were using PlayStations with video communication to talk to each other. Um, I've always been a believer in remote work needs to still function a lot like work. Like, I'm in my office here, it's not at my house. I still leave every day. I do my morning routine. I go to the gym. I do the things I'm going to do. I get dressed. I think where we fall down is when we don't create that environment made for work. And it's just, we roll out of bed in our pajamas and we kind of do some work. And I'm all for it. In the morning times, I can get some great work done at home before I leave. but it's a very specific type of work, usually catching up on emails or things like that, not deep work. I don't think that it's possible to do deep work unless you set the environment. And environment includes not just the space and the location, but getting ready, taking a shower, clothes, whatever those things are, activities that get you in that space. So I think that's the problem from working from home compared to remote work.
I would totally agree with you. I know I've spoken to several high level entrepreneurs, and one thing reigns true is that they treat their home office as if it was the office, right? I mean, they shower, they get dressed, they look professional, they enter into the quote unquote office space. And then when they enter out, it's this mental, emotional, and even physical exiting of the workday and then into family mode, which is really, really tough sometimes for us to create those boundaries. For you, as far as with kids and that kind of thing, we're growing up in a generation now, which I think it's good, and I also think we're learning it. So it feels, I think, for a lot of us, kind of clunky. And what I mean by that is, I remember growing up in my stepdad. He'd go to the office or he'd go on a work trip, and then he'd like disappear for 8 to 10 hours a day. Or sometimes if he was on a work trip, which he traveled quite a bit, sometimes it was Monday through Friday, I wouldn't see him for a whole week, and I'd see him on the weekends. And it was like work meant like sort of this vanishing in a way. Like, okay, dad's at work. And like I would often scratch my head too. I'm like, what does he do there? He was a software engineer. So I'm like, what does the guy even do? Like, what is work? And I remember when I was little, he would take me to his office, which I loved. I thought it was like, for some weird reason, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. I would bring like a briefcase, and I would make things with paper, and I was working. But there was that total separation for a kid to know that mom or dad's at work and then they come home. Well, now a lot of people work from home. So I know the big struggle right now. So like, I'm curious to get your opinion on this, is that, when kids come into the room, like right now it's 3:20 PM. So my kids aren't going to be home for another hour. But if they were here, they would totally like bomb our podcast. They would make an appearance. They'd wave to you. They say hello. It's my 7 and 9 year old. My two older ones wouldn't want to do that, but there's like this message that I think we're sending too, where it's like, hey, I'll be with you in a minute. Hey, I'm working right now. Like, I'm working right now. And then they leave. But that messaging is much different for our generation of parenting than it was when we were kids, because we didn't go into the other room and bother our parents really.
So I actually think that it's more of a positive than a negative. Like, I have those same stories. I remember going to the World Trade Center with my dad and sitting in the office with him and making photocopies or doing whatever. But the key was, I didn't understand what he did at all, right? And I think that we have the opportunity with integration to really show our kids what we do. And I think that's the opportunity that we should take today, is like, if my kids a few years ago asked what they did, they couldn't explain it at all. Dad works on the computer, right? But because I integrate them into the things I do, they can point to stuff and say, I get it. I see what he does when he comes home. He doesn't not work at all. He still is on the computer, but I can see that activity and that hard work, and then I can see the output, right? And I think what I missed with my dad was, I didn't see the output, right? Like, it was in the office, and I'm like, oh, okay, we just go in the office and we do stuff. But we never saw the output because he'd be away for that or whatever the things were, right?
Which I think it's interesting you talk about the output, because I think as a little kid, you're like, work is just something that takes my dad away from me. Like, I think that's how we view it to some degree. And probably like, I mean, I know for my kids, they're probably like, they probably just scratch their head some days. Cause like, I'm in here working and helping guys be better fathers and husbands. And they're like, why are you in there doing that? I'm out here, especially during the summer months. Like, that one's a little tough. You have a really fascinating story about output, and it was something recent with Formula One, but I would love for you to share that story about how you integrated the family into that project.
Yeah, so I spent the last year of my life volunteering. So I made no money doing it for YPO, Young Presidents Organization, building a 550 person event here in Las Vegas that just happened a week and a half ago for Formula One. And so like, that was a big investment of my time. Like, that took me away from the kids for lots of time. But I integrated them in the lead up, but also the event itself, right? So they got to see the output. So the lead up, right? Like, they saw, the products I was ordering, the things I was doing. They got excited about having a Stanley Cup with the YPO logo on it, right? Like, so I could get them excited about small pieces leading up to it, seeing that it, for me, was very important to show them long work, right? A year of my life put towards something, and then showing them the output. Like, they came to the event, they came to practice 1 and 2, two and 3. They saw the actual output, the people excited and interested in the event. So for them, they could identify and say, okay, 1, I understood that dad worked a long amount of time to do this. 2, I can touch and feel it, right? Like, I can taste the food. I can have the artist activation, the guy drawing on the records with my name on it. Like, I can feel the stuff and I can see it. And then I can see the result of the people being happy, right? Like, so yes, I was gone, quote unquote, for a number of hours. The time we spent together, I don't think it mattered if that was 15 minutes or 3 hours at the race, right? They saw the output, and that for them, they can point to and say, dad did that and it took time.
What were some of the conversations like with the kids as they saw this whole thing unfold and they saw the output, they saw the results?
So, I mean, obviously, as a 5-year-old and 6
Yeah.
and 10, some of it is very simple. Like,
Yeah, which makes it even better.
I want the Stanley Cup in both white and gray,
Yeah.
right? Like, so understanding that, like, that's a very, focused thing. But 2, like, being at a Formula One event is just a life-changing experience. Like, those cars are so loud and so fast, right? And there's just something about being there, right? So, like, my 10-year-old said, like, I just can't believe how fast they're going, right? She also wanted to know if she could drive the vehicle.
Right.
So I think that creates excitement and interest. But really what I hope, and they didn't say this, is they saw the other people, right? Because I built an event for other people. Like, did I enjoy the race? Sure, maybe, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But I built it for the enjoyment of others.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that that's what they took from it, and they could see that in people's faces. And thankfully, people came up to me and said, thank you so much. And the kids were there. So I think that they took that away. But that's a nonverbal, like, you don't verbalize that necessarily,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
That's just actions.
That is something that I'm sure they'll remember for the rest of their lives. If you think about the 5 senses, right? If we can experience something, using multiple different senses, not just, what we see, but what we hear, those loud noises, the feeling of, the the engine roar, like in our chest, the vibration of it and all that. And you just, kids remember that kind of stuff when they're 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. They'll be like, I remember this day when I was a little kid. And that's a really cool thing. I'm curious, as far as, we mentioned entitlement earlier. I know you have the capacity, and I've listened to other podcasts that you've been on. You have the capacity to probably, get your kids anything that they want. I know one of the things you've said on other podcasts is when you pass on, there's very little, you're going to leave them minimal amounts of money behind, on purpose. But this whole entitlement thing, I think we're seeing in this generation of fathers, which I'm pleased to see it. We're seeing, I think, a generation of fathers who really want to serve. They really do. They're very curious. I mean, like, all these podcasts that are out now, all these communities that are out, we're seeing guys like raise their hands saying, like, man, I just want to do this really well. And I think what the temptation is to overserve and to over deliver and to, make a kid dependent their entire lives. And there is that entitlement. So how do you go about making sure that your kids are raised with work ethic? They know what a good day's work is all about. They know how to work smart. All these things that are so important as they grow up, because quite frankly, they might even, I don't know if they've actually even confronted you with this, be like, Dad, like, we can totally afford a PS5. Like, why won't you just give me one? Not that they say that like that, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing as parents is to allow failure. And I
Oh
think
yeah.
that for a long time, we've just, kind of shielded our kids. If you think back to, like, the past 20 years, right? We've shielded a lot of failure. So I believe in letting the kids fail. I will invest unlimited amounts of money in education. and almost none in other areas of things, right? So one of our core values as a family is experiences over things. And I try to demonstrate that to them again and again and again, right? And there's obviously struggles within that. We're going to the UK for Christmas, and I have built the privilege to be able to fly in a lay down seat, which I only use miles for. I've never paid for in my life. But the kids are also not old enough that I can put them in coach yet. So it's hard, right? Like, I'm like, you guys don't deserve to be here, and you won't be. So don't get used to it, right? Like, when you're 12, you're going to go sit and coach like I did, right? And that's how you build character, and that's how you create desire for something more and work hard and all of those pieces, right? So I think that there's a balance between failure and creating a safe environment. And I would prefer less safe and more failure. And how do you engineer those things over time, I think, is our challenge. I haven't perfected that, right? Like, I'm still struggling with that on a daily basis, because they're still in a protected environment of school, right? And, where can we create those failures for them so they can see that? But again, for me, it still goes back to, like, can I show them with my hard work what it means, right? Like, do I need to work? No. Plain and simple, right? But I work really hard.
Yeah.
Because I enjoy it, I like it, like all of those pieces. So that's what I can give to them, is showing them that.
I love that, man. One of your core values is the same as ours. We call it experiences over stuff. We've been given Christmas time. We take the money that we budget for Christmas, and we usually go plan some sort of experience for the following year, or within like the first 30 days of the year, something like that. But I think that's really, really, I think the kids, what I've noticed over the years, especially Christmas time or holiday times or whatever, is within about 4 days, they usually forget about what they gotten from a toy perspective, or because of the quality of toys out there, it's broke, or we've lost parts of it or pieces or whatever. And then it just ends up in a pile, and it just becomes a mess. But the experiences, those last a lifetime. Those are the memories that truly last a lifetime.
The only toys that I really will ever buy are things you can build, right? So you can touch and feel and create something. So if that's blocks, Legos, we have wooden blocks at home. We have all of those things because you can touch and feel and create something with your mind. So that, I think, is valuable. And games, right? So those are the two areas where I'm okay buying a thing, because I'm engaging our minds together. It could be a family game, it could be a kid's game, it doesn't really matter, compared to a video game where I'm pressing buttons,
Yeah,
right? I think anything where you're touching and feeling and doing something with your brain creatively, that's valuable.
I agree. We love Legos here, and my kids and we went out and bought this mechanical claw that you actually like. I mean, it's like a ridiculous amount of steps to put this thing together. It's got like hydraulics and all this other stuff. Like, it literally looks like the Terminator, hand thing. And my little ones helped me we all three put that together. And we're still in the final phases of it. I think we've been working on it now for about 4 or 5 nights, but I love interaction like that. The easy button is, go play some video games, right? Which we do that sometimes, but I think it's really important to, bond, when it comes to that kind of thing. Last night we played Battleship, which I think is kind of fun and sort of strategic, and super fun, things like that. I'm curious. I know we talked a lot about the present and just a little bit of the past with your family and what it looks like now. And but what I want to get to, and I want to talk about your relationship with your partner Dawn, but I also want to talk about how you grew up. So you mentioned your dad growing up. As far as like a sibling standpoint goes, or your mom and dad, what was that upbringing like for you?
Sure. So I have one younger sister, 3 years younger than me. We grew up in New York City and Manhattan. So very different childhood, right? Like, we had a lot of independence pretty early, which I think helped me a lot. We went to a very interesting school, City and Country School in Manhattan. It's a progressive school founded by Carolyn Pratt, who wrote a fantastic book, I Learned from Children. It is one of the best books possible, I think, from a kid's and kind of growth perspective. It's based around education, but it's much more about how kids, think and feel with their hands, and it's not about grades. And very interesting perspective. Very small school. I had 12 kids in my class. Then went to a larger high school, and so that was a very different experience with grades and all of the things that go with it. But my parents were also divorced pretty early on, so I was 5 roughly. I don't really recall a lot of the earlier times, like when they were together. But I actually found it a very positive experience. And I think a lot of people, like I have conversations with friends all the time about this, like, oh my God, if we get divorced, it's going to be terrible for the kids. It can be, right? It can also be terrible if you stay together. So I don't think that
Yeah.
really matters. But for me, it meant having 2 households that were very unique and very special for different reasons. And I got to experience my mom and my dad in those unique scenarios, and learn from each of them separately. And I think if they were together, I wouldn't have gotten that. So that, for me, that was a gift, right? And looking back on it, there are so many experiences I can point to that were very specific like that.
Mhm. Was it hard for you? Do you remember being 5 and your parents splitting up?
So I don't really remember them splitting up. I remember them being apart. And the biggest impact for me as a kid growing up was always, my other friends were going to do things together with their 2 parents, like sports activities or whatever. And I had the privilege of going to my dad's house in Pennsylvania. So it was this weird dichotomy of like, I kind of as a kid, wish I was just going to the sports game with everyone else, but then also had really unique opportunities of independence to drive around a big tractor and lawnmower and stuff like this out at a country house, right? So like, it's hard for me to say if it was positive or negative. It was a little bit of both, but in the end, I'm really happy with what happened, right? Like that independence to me was very valuable.
So my mom was married 3 times, and I remember there were things that I liked about it, that the times it was just me and her. And there were things that felt like it was missing too. I remember like playing baseball and you look over at the bleachers and it's just your mom and everybody else has got their mom and dad. Cause when you and I grew up, divorce probably wasn't as common as it is now, but it was something that I definitely felt. But at the same time, I always remembered, especially my stepdad, he was around from the time I was 4 to 10. And I just remember how much they fought. And I was just like, oh, and I remember like literally being 10 and him leaving. And there's a part of me that just felt very empty. But there's also a part of me that was very relieved. I was like, man, this sucks. But at the same time, like, I'm not going to have to like wake up in the middle of the night and they're like screaming at each other. Right. Um, as far as your relationship as time progressed with both your mom and your dad, did you spend I wouldn't say equally, but did you spend time with both of them? And basically how did the relationship um develop over time as you grew up?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't equal amounts of time. It was very different time, right? Because I was with my mom primarily, right? So that was school days in essence, right? So weekdays, and I would see my dad on the weekends. And I think, unfortunately, that created a weird dynamic because my dad could do a lot of fun things with me, and my mom had to do a lot of difficult things with me. I'm sure if I asked her today, she didn't love that. I think the result was fine, right? And I don't think that I ever had the closest relationship with my mom. She's a hard woman to get along with, in a variety of ways. She's very stern. She's very driven, and very British, which is not necessarily the warmest set of people, right? But I love that about her, right? Like I wouldn't change it. But yeah, in fairness, I think it was probably hard for her, comparatively speaking, because it was a lot of fun times with my dad, and she had to deal with the difficult stuff.
Yeah, sounds like it. So your mom she was from the UK?
Yeah,
Okay. Is that where you're going to Christmas over there?
yeah. So
Okay.
my mom's from the Isle of Jersey, so small island, closer to France than the UK. But all of her family's there, and my aunts and uncles and cousins and such. But she's actually spent a lot of her time traveling around the world. She ran schools in New York and New Jersey for a long time, but then went international and has run schools in Myanmar, Mumbai, a number of places. So she's actually meeting all of us in the UK on an around the world plane ticket that she's on right now. And you know, I'll meet my sister there, take our family, her family, and we'll all gather there.
Wow, so cool, man. That's really cool. So talk to me about the relationship with your dad then.
Yeah, so it was a very interesting relationship. He gave me a lot of freedom and a lot of latitude to make mistakes, probably where I get kind of that idea of failure. But also showed me what hard work was and being driven. And the story or the example that always comes to my mind is, you know, in kind of, I don't know, ninth grade, eighth grade, somewhere in that range, I wanted to design websites. And I said, I need this Dell computer. It's like $4,000. This is when computers were expensive, right? It's probably way slower than my cell phone right now. And I said, Dad, I really need this computer. I probably need that one, but that's the one I wanted. And he said, that's fine. You can get it, but you're going to pay me back for it. Right. And he was very specific about it. He's like, this is not a gift for you to play with, because I didn't really like video games that much. So he knew that's not why I wanted it. But he was very specific in his communication. This is not a gift. This is an investment in you and your business, and you're going to pay me back for it. If your business fails, that's fine. You're still paying me back. And I did pay him back, right? And it took me, I don't know, probably a year, right? And he extended very reasonable terms. He didn't charge me interest, right? Maybe he should have, and I could have learned early the idea of interest. But that for me was a very important lesson, because he had the capacity to give it to me, but he wanted to teach a valuable lesson in something I wanted.
I love that story, man. We've done similar things with the boys here, you know, as far as you know, ways that they can make money. My oldest one, he started a business for car wash and detailing. And you know, we did this thing where he had to 10x his startup expenses and paid for everything out of his own pocket. I think it was $50, you know, for like, you know, his bucket and like all the other stuff he needed. And I was like, all right, man, like 1 month to make 500. Let's go. Right. We created the packages and all that stuff. And dude, he did it in 25 days. But you know, it was really cool. I was like, you know, hey, this is how you provide a service for people. This is how you can make money, right? And this is how you can then take the money and make sure that we're diligent about some of the things we do with it, right? You know, save and give and then spend as well. You know, as far as how did you
Yeah,
know?
I bet too in there, one of the other key learnings is he also got told no by people, right? And I
Oh
think our
yeah.
kids don't get told no enough for, I'm not talking about like discipline, because we say no all the time for don't do this or don't do that, but meaning like they don't get told, no, I'm not going to buy that. No, this service isn't good enough. Like they don't hear that. And that's part of failure and growth, is to be challenged, right? Like going to someone's door and saying, can I wash your car, is really hard, right? Like that is a really hard thing to do. And doing it even once probably teaches some great lessons.
It does. I love the no thing. You know, he had to pitch his business and be judged on it, you know, as far as like all the intricacies and all this thing. He belongs to an organization for young entrepreneurs, and he had to like literally dress in a suit, panel of judges, pitch his business in front of all these judges, and they had to give him feedback, which I loved it, man. Like it was great. Some of the feedback, they were opportunities for growth and some of the good stuff too. But I'm like, man, it's all good. It's all good. If you're gonna fail, right, this is the time, like where the consequences are super low, right? For you, when did you how did you get your start in the professional space? As far as, did you always know you were going to be like an entrepreneur, or did you think you were going to go full time at some point, or did you start out thinking you were going to be at a full time job as an employee?
I mean, look, I think I had a job at one point, like working in a bakery for like 2 days until I got frustrated and left. So that didn't last very long, but I knew very early on. If I think back to, I had tremendous difficulties, and I say very specifically overcame a learning disability. So I was years behind reading and writing. I went to tutoring 5 days a week. I invested a lot of time, and my parents, luckily, a lot of money in education to help me learn how to learn, because I learn differently, right? And luckily that happened earlier in my life. So, before high school. So I was able to then excel in high school. But I can remember, using FileMaker Pro and other things on the computer and building things. I sold jewelry. I did all sorts of silly things. Silly is probably not the right word, but like small things to make money. In high school, I ran parties, right? Like I was the kid, very odd dichotomy. Like I would spend a lot of my time in the computer lab because I loved computers and building things, but I also ran parties on the weekend to make money, right?
You
And
ran parties. Like, what do you mean?
so we would invite lots of people to Lawson, New York, and charge people for coming to a party, right?
That's really
So
cool.
it was a weird kind of difference, right? Like I was played football on the varsity team and then spent time in the computer lab, right? So it was very odd. But I think that if you then step forward to college, that same path continued. I knew there was only one thing I wanted to do and one school I wanted to go to. Babson College, entrepreneurship program, best in the country. I only applied to that college. I never should have gotten in, right? Like I did everything possible to make sure I got in. I probably went to 22 open houses to make sure my face was seen. I went to multiple interviews, alumni things. I got a recommendation from a professor. I was then accepted second semester. So it wasn't even a wait list. It was, we know people are going to drop out first semester. If you want to accept, you can start second semester. I'm like, I'm in.
Wow.
Like, I don't care. But that's how I was very driven. And there's probably a story in there too about how I almost didn't go to college because I was working in an internet company in New York and my mom convinced me, but it was the right path.
Dang, man, that's crazy. What's funny is your path and mine are somewhat similar, except for mine was high school. So I didn't have the grades in grade school I truth be told, I failed the eighth grade. I had to do eighth grade twice, which really sucked. Um, but it wasn't for a lack of smarts. I just,
We should come back to that because I actually
yeah,
believe that kids should repeat grades earlier.
yeah,
Not eighth grade, that's a little hard, but
that was a
second.
little hard. Yeah. But, I did better my second go around, I had B's and C's. But I really just kind of like, it was in a dark, really, really dark place with family stuff going on. And I just kind of like just gave up. I was like, yeah, I'm just not doing homework anymore. And I just literally just gave up. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me. But when it was time to go pick high schools, like we were super poor growing up, and there was an all boys college prep called the Smet Jesuit High School. And they came and visited our school. And I was like, and I was just blown away by like the culture. And I was just like, and then I went and visited it. I was just like, oh, this is where I want to go. Like, this is where I really, really want to go. And because quite frankly, where I lived, if I was going to go to the public high school, we were in the ghetto. Like you just didn't want to go to high school. It was just, there was violence. There's all kinds of crazy stuff. And I really, really wanted to go to this high school. And I'll never forget applying. And I was just like, I don't have the grades. You needed at least like a 3.5 to get in there. And I was like, I don't have the grades to go here. And then I had an interview with the dean, and my mom went with me. And this dean sat me down, and my mom didn't prep me with anything. I don't even think she knew what to say or us to prep. And the dean said this. He goes, so why do you want to come here so bad? And I told him all the reasons why I wanted to go. Like I just, I wanted a better, well-rounded education. I wanted to be challenged. I wanted to all these different things. And then he's like, well, what if you don't get in? And I go, if I don't get in, I'm not going to high school. And I'll never forget my mom, like literally just totally like jerked her head, like looked at me like, what? And I remember the dean going, okay. He's like, so you really what does that mean? I was like, I don't know. I don't have a plan B. Like, this is where I want to go. And I literally think it was that statement that got my acceptance letter. I just think that's all it was. And then I had to go there on a work grant. But it sounds like you were you were a savage about trying to get into this school as well. And so going back to the entrepreneurship program, I know it's the best, but did it teach you? Did it prepare you well for everything you did in the entrepreneur space? Because you're a ridiculously successful entrepreneur.
So it's interesting. I get asked this question a lot, and obviously by Babson, because they want to know the answer to this question. Can you train entrepreneurs? And I genuinely believe the answer is no. However, what Babson and other schools can do very effectively is train the skills that make you a better entrepreneur, right? How to read a P&L, how to hire and fire, how to do management, how to do analysis and negotiation. Like those are how-to skills that you can definitely get better at through case study work, through training, through education, right? Like zero question about that. I do not think that you can train someone to be an entrepreneur. Either you have that spirit or you don't. What I think Babson does a good job of, and I think other schools are catching on to, is say that there's 25% of the population that has that entrepreneurial spirit. Make the number up, right? What do you do with the other 75%? I think what you do to make them successful is you train for entrepreneurial ideas that can be implemented in large companies. So if you look at the successful students at Babson, whatever the percentage is, 80% of them go on to be in a big company. They go on to consulting, to Deloitte, they go on to whatever, but they've been taught the ideas and the spirit of entrepreneurship, even though they are not ready to be an entrepreneur themselves, right? And I think that's where Babson has succeeded very well in understanding that kind of split. And there's just some people that are entrepreneurs.
I think it's something that's just, I don't know if it's wired in us or if we're just like crazy people, or I don't know. I don't know what it is. Like
Maybe it's a disease.
it
I don't
might
know.
be, my dad is an entrepreneur and he's owned a business for 45 years and very successful. And my stepmom is basically the CFO. And she always jokes. She's like, yeah, she's like, he's the risky one. Like he just goes out and just makes things happen. And she's like, I had this super cush job at Boeing that I was like super happy at. And like, I could have just like literally retired from there. She doesn't regret it. Like, but she fully explains that like, I'm not wired like that. I would never do that. Like, I don't like risk. Just put me behind my desk where I can do my analysis and all my work and all this other stuff. And I'm good. He goes out and does like all the hunting and all the creative stuff and all this other stuff that needs to happen in order for the business to run. And he loves that. And I don't. But like sometimes I wonder if it's just something, if there's a little crazy in all of us to some degree. I don't know. What do you think?
I think there's definitely some crazy in us.
Yeah.
You don't do these things and not be somewhat crazy. But I think that what entrepreneurs are actually great at is adjusting for risk, right?
Mm.
Like we're not just risky people, we adjust for risk reward, right? And we're willing to take some amount of risk for large rewards, right? And I think that's what people don't always understand. It's not just craziness going out there being risky. It's looking at what the reward return ratio is to that risk, right? And then calibrating it and choosing, where am I most risky? Where do I be conservative? Like those things. But for me, it's a lot like, there are people that are entrepreneurs or they're not. You can't teach it. And I think this, to me, also goes into this topic of like, should everyone go to college or not? And I think the answer is no. And I think we've made a mistake in setting our kids up for failure in that everyone needs to go to college. As a society, I think that's wrong. As parents, I think that's wrong. Like there are some people that should go to college and there's some people that shouldn't. And it's not good or bad. It's not a equation that's looking at value, right? Because there are a tremendous number of jobs that are making far more money, right? If you just look at money, that don't require a college degree compared to people that are not doing anything with a college degree, right? Like there are trades you can make a tremendous amount of money in. And I think that we need to be careful with our kids. And like, I've always told my kids, like, that choice is up to you. Like, you do what you're going to do. I'll support it, right? Meaning, if you go to college, I will give you the gift of paying for college. That's the gift I can give you. If you don't go to college, that's also fine. I'll give you a different gift. And that could be traveling for a year. That could be doing something that I value. That's my gift to you for my hard work, but that's where it ends. After that, you're a responsible human being that needs to survive on their own, right? And that, I think, is the best thing we can do for our kids.
I love that, man. I remember growing up and my mom, I mean, just pounded it in my head. You're going to college. You were going to college, period. I remember growing up thinking like, there's no choice. That's just what we do. Like, there's no actual, like, you go to high school, then you go to college. Like, there is no separation in that whatsoever. And now I think that there's a different school of thought out there, that obviously they're ridiculously successful people that don't have college degrees. It just depends on how they're wired and what they're willing to do. Um, I want to switch gears to your relationship with Dawn. Obviously, this is a dad show. I would call it husband slash partner as well, because that relationship with our wives or partner, in your case, is extremely important. And I've said this for a long time, and I'm just going to say this to you, and I want you just to give me your initial knee jerk reaction to this and what you believe. And if we don't land on common ground, that's totally okay. I just want to know what you think. I truly believe that if you get that relationship working well with your partner, your spouse, your wife, whatever, and things are really, really good, I honestly think that's one of the first dominoes to fall for a man to be more productive, more fulfilled, more mentally healthy, more physically healthy, emotionally healthy. And he becomes a better father, I think, because of it. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree with one caveat in that I think that there's healthy kind of friction there. Like Dawn and I are not always aligned on everything, and
Sure.
that's okay, right? I think where we are aligned on the big issues, like the core values and the things that we care about, obviously, but it's not like we're the same people. And I think for me, that was one of the most important things. I had previously been married. We're not the same people. I'm naturally an introvert. She's naturally an extrovert, right? Like we are very, very different people. We have different interests. We have very different things, and that's okay, right? What we do well together is she supports me in the things that are valuable to me, and I support her in the things that are valuable to her, right? That's where the alignment happens. And there is zero question that over the past 13 years we've been together, if she wasn't there supporting me, I would not be as successful, right? Like, luckily in my life, I was successful before her from a financial perspective. So that, like, I had found success, but there is zero question where I am today is because of that support, right? And I don't know how you replace that. I don't think it can be replaced.
I don't think so either. And I love that friction aspect to it. Jessica and I are the exact same way. In fact, we're two totally different people. But man, we've got a killer relationship. And I definitely think, man, I want you to actually expand upon this a little bit, the core values thing. We talk about that term a lot in our community, your core values. And I think that's a term that's really tossed around a lot, that people don't quite understand, number one, really what it means, or number two, how it affects us as individuals. And I would even say number three, how does it affect our relationship with our significant other?
Yeah.
I would love for you to share what core values are to you and how that impacts your relationship with her.
I mean, I'll start actually with, I think, one of my biggest failures. And that is, I built core values in my companies 20 years ago. I didn't do it in my family in terms of specifying them, vocalizing them, writing them down, having them part of everything that we do until the last 7 or 8 years, right? So, like, that I think is my biggest failure from a family perspective over the last 20 years. Like, that should have been much more specific and driven like it was in my companies. And it was always on my list. Like, okay, we're going to sit down and do this just like the process we did in our companies. We're going to vocalize it. We're going to write them down. We're going to use them. And it just kept falling off. And so I really do look back at that as something I wish I had done sooner. But I think just like our companies, it's really about how we do things, not what we do, right? And that's what I try to explain to my kids. Like, I can tell you how to do something. It's much better if I show you and you understand why. And I think the why is what those values really do. Like I can say, don't touch that, don't do this, don't do whatever, right? Those are all negative statements. I don't really love those. Like I wish that I could remove them 100%. I'm not great at that. I still say no and don't. But I think the more powerful thing is to really say, like I said, one, experiences over things, but how you do one thing is how you do everything, right? Like that's one of our other values. I can show them that again and again, right? Work hard, be nice. I can show them that. And then every time when there's a decision or discipline, we can point back to that. Like this is literally on our back door out the garage where we go. I also have a other list there too, that when they were misbehaving a little bit during COVID, I put up Jordan Peterson's, not the 12 rules for life, but he has a specific section for kids. We put that up on the wall and, kind of pointed to it and said, here are some important things. But like those values to me drive everything. And I believe if my kids can live those, everything else is fine. Like, doesn't really matter what else we do. If they can really live those, it will all be fine.
I love that, man. I love that. What advice would you give yourself if you were to, you and Don have been together for 13 years, correct?
Yeah.
What advice would you have given yourself 14 years ago? If you had the opportunity to have a conversation with yourself 14 years ago, what relationship advice would you give?
I wish that we talked about more specifically our different love languages. They match very much. They're different, but they match up very well. I think we got lucky there, right? Like that's not a conversation we had. I wish that we did. I think the other piece was, I think we got lucky with some of our values around kids and how to raise kids rather than being explicit about it. And sometimes in life, we just get lucky, right? Like my business partner, I've done that stuff with him for 20 plus years now. We got lucky. There's no question about it, right? Like there are things that I've learned now that I would point to and say, do this or do that, but we got lucky. And I think the same exists with Don. And how those align. So I wish that we had had earlier conversations to make it explicit, because I think having explicit conversations solves for a lot of the problems we see later. If that's problems in relationship, if that's divorce, if that's misalignment around kids. So part of it was luck for us, and I wish it was explicit.
Everybody always says, like, I remember growing up, they're like, when you get married and when you're young, you think that having kids is actually going to solve problems. It actually makes your problems more amplified, which it really, really does. Yeah. I'm curious about as far as your parenting styles and how they complement each other and maybe how they're also different.
Wildly different. But I think that's why it sort of works. Dawn is much more caring, patient, protective, right? I'm much more independence, discipline, routine driven, right? And I think that there's zero question that if I was raising kids on my own, that would be a bad recipe, right? Like that just doesn't work for raising well-rounded kids. I think on the other side, Dawn would have a similar struggle with different problems, right? Like being overprotective and things like that. So together, we kind of match up in there, right? And that's that friction, right? Like there's a healthy, I don't agree with that. I don't think we should do it this way. I have lower patience, she has higher patience, or whatever it is. But it's all little things. We agree on the big stuff, like how do we spend money and time, right? Like how do we think about what success looks like for our kids? Those things align. The individual little stuff doesn't always, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, I'm curious as far as you look to the future, and you want to go on a quick journey with me?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so 6 and 10, that's how old the kids are?
Yeah, oldest is 18 or 19
right
now. So
okay, so yeah, I mean, let's do this. Let's fast forward the tape 10 years. So you have a 29-year-old, you have a 20-year-old, and you have a 16-year-old. You and Dawn have been together now 23 years. What is it that you're celebrating as a family? What things are most meaningful that haven't happened yet?
Yeah. So for me, it's all about independence of the kids. I think that is our single most important success metric from a kid's perspective. Obviously, they have to be living our core values because we don't want asshole kids, right?
Right.
But independence and the ability to fail on your own, pick yourself up and keep going, I think is really the only success metric that matters at any of those ages, right? So like, I don't want kids living at home. Like, I love my kids. I don't want them living at home, not because I don't want them there, but because that's not independence, right? That's not what builds healthy humans that continue making the world better, right? So if I look forward 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, I think it's all the same. And there'll be lots of great things that happen in there. There'll be marriages, there'll be kids, there'll be all sorts of things that happen, right? But all of that is on the path of independence, not dependence, right? And I think that goes back to our core values of how we think about money, right? Like, we don't want dependent kids at any age.
What are things that you do? What are practices that, that are just in your parenting regimen to make sure that you are creating independent human beings?
So I think the first piece is education,
Yeah.
right? I think providing a really great education is the greatest gift we can give. And that doesn't mean just school, right? That means all of the educational opportunities that exist around us always, right? So first is education. Second, I think, is showing them what independence looks like, showing them on a daily basis. Your mom and I are independent people. We're not dependent on each other, right? I think that's a really healthy thing to show, right? We have lives that are separate of each other and we have lives that are together. Just like you should have lives separate of your parents and lives that are with your parents, right? It's not all one direction or the other, right? And then I think the last piece is setting up systems and processes that promote this. So if that's how money is spent internally, how money is given, how, all of those pieces, because that's how we can control what happens next, right? So if that's paying rent in the house at a certain age, there's lots of ways to do that and manage the activity itself. But the tool that we have, or the control that we have as parents, is that, right? Like, we can only influence a certain number of things. That's one of them. I'm going to influence it the way I value things. Doesn't mean it's the same way you value things, but that's the way I can exert influence for what I think is the best value.
I love this whole message around creating more independent kids. And what's so funny, man? You want to hear a quick story? Did you grow up wrestling by chance?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I read an article. I wrestled growing up, and I read this article that like some of the most successful entrepreneurs and CEOs have had some sort of wrestling in their background, or at least a martial art of some sort. But so I'll pose this question to you, and then I'll pose the question first, and I'll tell you a story so you can kind of gel on it. I want you to think about how you as a parent deal with your kids when it comes to failure. So I'll share a story. My view of it is, I want my kids to fail. I don't like seeing them fail, but I love the learnings that come out of it, because as soon as they fail, I'm like, what'd you learn? Right? It's all for nothing. If we didn't learn anything, what'd you learn? What would you do differently next time you had this opportunity, whatever, right? So I've never actually inserted myself, and here's the story. I've never actually inserted myself in I would say, a father and kid heated interaction. And this past weekend, I came about that close, like that close. It was disturbing to watch what I saw. So my oldest son, he's 17, he wrestles. It's kind of fascinating. He's in the band. So he's in the marching band. He's the only kid in the high school history who's done marching band and wrestling. So it's kind of cool to see that. But so I'm up in the stands. It's a long day. I think we got there at like 10 in the morning. We left at like 4:30 in the afternoon. And I'm sitting there with my wife in the bleachers, and I'm sitting next to like these other kids that, and we're all the way up at the top. And one kid next to me was like probably 106. I think that was his weight class. He was a freshman. And it was him and I think it was pretty sure it was his older brother, his mom, and then dad. And he lost all three of his matches. And his dad just ripped him apart. Like, just like, it was almost like, is this guy for real? Like, the way he was talking to his kid just blew my mind. And the kid did pretty darn good. Like, he lost his matches, but he was out there just like, I mean, he was out there after it, never gave up. And his dad was like, you want to get cocky, huh? I told you over the summer that you need to train more. And look what's happening. You've lost every match. You're giving up in here and in here. I've told you that over and over again. And then he takes like his sweatpants and like shoves it in the kid's chest. And like he did this 3 times after he lost every single time. And then he was sitting in front of his kid and he kept turning around, just blasting him, just blasting him. And I'm sitting there and this kid, like, my heart just freaking broke for this kid, man. Like, he literally looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole and die. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, dude, I know you think you're doing good here, but number one, you're making your kid hate this sport. Number one. Number two, he's going to look back on this experience, not remembering what he learned, but how bad his dad beat the shit out of him emotionally for losing. Like, and I told you so. And it was so freaking condescending, man. Like, the guy did everything but punish his kid. Like, you're grounded. Like, that's what I thought was coming next. And I was sitting, and my wife was like, I can't believe what I'm hearing. And this is like a guy in his probably mid 40s, you know, like two older boys. And I came so close to being like, dude, do you really think you're being effective right now? Like, you want your kid to remember this day with you breathing down his neck like this? He's not going to learn. He's not going to remember what he learned. He's going to remember this. But I didn't. It's not my place, not my business. But that's not how I, as a father, handle failure. But I'm so curious for you, because you mentioned that earlier in the podcast. How do you handle failure?
So I think the first step is celebrating failure as something to learn from. But the key to me is that doesn't mean that it's okay to lose, right? There's a difference between failure and losing, right? Failure is something we can learn from. We all want to win, right? And we want to be winners. And I think that there's a difference there. The problem I have with this story is that type of discipline or process or whatever can work for some kids and not for others. I think our job as parents is to figure out what works to motivate each individual kid and to understand it's likely not the same, even for twins, right? And there are probably aspects of that that are effective. As a whole, not effective. I don't think there's any question about that. There are aspects that are effective when taken together with what did you learn and a collaborative approach to understand together what can we do better next time. And maybe the end result was the same. You should have trained more over the summer. You should have been in the weight room, whatever. But being told that is different than discovering that from the interaction and the process, right? So I think it's our job as parents to figure out that line for each of our kids, right? And one is definitely different than the other. And just, you got to push all the way to that line to get the best result.
I agree. I like the collaborative approach. I like to open up anytime my kids fail at something. I like to open up discussion because I want them dissecting and thinking through and analyzing and understanding what might have went wrong. What did I learn? What would I do different next time? Had the opportunity. What would I even do differently this time if I had the opportunity to do it over again, versus me just shoving it down their throat sideways, and then ripping it back out again. Like,
well, I mean,
this dude was
think
doing.
about like the things that I learned that were most effective for my parents. They probably told me these things before and I didn't listen, because no kid really wants to listen to their parents. We're trying to build, like, biologically this independence, right? Like, we're made to do this and show that we're, strong humans that can be independent, right? So we don't want to be told things. We want to discover and learn things. My parents, I'm sure, told me 100 times something, but I still had to go touch the stove. I still had to go do the thing, right?
Right.
And how do we set it up so we can shortcut that as much as possible without telling? It's a very difficult game, right?
Totally get it, man. As we wrap up here, I just want, number one, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. We've talked about so many things, you know, your upbringing, what you learned from your mom, what you learned from your dad, what you've learned about business and about failure, parenting, relationship with your significant other, Dawn. Um, as we wrap up here, you know, what do you have in the works, you know, over the next year or so? Like, what do you want to point the men's attention to that that you might be working on next?
Yeah, so I'm actually going through kind of a not crisis, but a decision point about what do I do next. I spent the last year of my life volunteering in this, YPO position. I don't think I'm going to do that next year necessarily. I've wound down some businesses and sold them and such. I do write a weekly newsletter that I spend quite a bit of effort and time on, talking about some of these topics, but pretty wide reaching, from entrepreneurship to family, finance, whatever. Kind of the topics I'm thinking about each week. So, I'm investing in that, and really thinking about where do I want to spend the next 10 years of my life, right? And, being very specific about that, because I think it's important to think like, you can do lots of little things and lots of side things, but like, where am I going to add value to the world over the next 10 years? And I want to be slow and careful about that.
That's really cool, man. Where can men find your newsletter if they want to just engage in that and connect with you?
Yeah, davidhauser.com. I'm sure we can put links in the show notes, or you can
Oh, yeah.
Google me, and such, and quite easy to sign up. There's probably about 15,000 people on there, and I really do enjoy engaging. Like, people reply to those messages, and a lot of people ask me over like the last, I've done it now for, I don't know, 4 years, 5 years. Like, why do I do it? I make no money from it. I don't want to make money from it. But I do genuinely believe I've become a better writer, one, and two, a better sharer. Like, in my life, with Dawn, with my kids, with business associates, like, I've just become better at sharing what I feel and how I feel it, because every week I've created a habit of working on that. And that has been more valuable than anything else.
I truly believe, you know, journaling or writing a newsletter, writing a book, writing content, it helps us, I think, as individuals grow, helps us evolve, it helps us think clearer, you know, it helps us with our thought processes. And it's a beautiful gift to give to somebody else who wants that. So appreciate you doing that. Gents, you're not gonna have to look far. You can go to thedadedge.com/458 for this show if you want to connect with David. We'll have his website. You can obviously engage in his newsletter. We'll also have his LinkedIn profile, Instagram, the whole nine yards for you guys if you want to connect and follow. David, this was awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. Thanks for sharing your wisdom around entrepreneurship, around fatherhood, around relationships with our significant others. Truly appreciate it, man. This was an honor.
Thank you for having me. And I really love these topics, and it's nice to talk about something other than business. So this was nice. Thank you.
I've heard that a time or two, you know, because a lot of times, I mean, the podcasts that I listened to you on when I was doing homework on you, obviously they were obviously business and entrepreneur podcast. And you're talking all about businesses, and that's all the questions were too. Was a ton of businesses, and I've heard frequently over the past 8 years since doing this podcast, like, man, like, it's actually kind of cool to talk about something else. The real things that are important to me. So I'm glad to hear that, man.
Thanks.
You bet, gentlemen. Go out, live legendary. Take care.